You're standing over your bike right now, aren't you? Rear wheel up on the stand, that chain sagging like an old clothesline, the sprocket teeth curled over like little waves. You already looked up the price. A chain and sprocket set, somewhere between $150 and $300, and that's before a shop touches it. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. The chain on my bike has more than 40,000 miles on it, and I haven't bought a new one in over 6 years. It runs quieter than the day I put it on. That's not luck, and it's not an expensive chain. It's a method a Japanese mechanic showed me at a bench that smelled like kerosene and green tea. They call it going chainless, and it doesn't mean throwing the chain away. It means never being owned by it again. By the end of this, I'll hand you a technique that racers used in the 1930s and Japanese chain makers quietly built into every sealed link after 1971. It works on the tired, rusty chain already on your bike, not a new one, the one you were about to replace. I remember the first time I complained to the old man about it. I told him I'd already worn out 2 chains in 3 years, and I dropped the greasy thing on his bench like it was proof the world was against me. He didn't even look up. He just wiped his hands, picked it up, held one link to the light, and said, "You have been oiling the outside of a problem that lives on the inside." I didn't understand that sentence for almost a year. When I finally did, it changed every chain I ever touched. So let me start where he started with me. Because the reason your chains keep dying has almost nothing to do with what you think. Pick up any old chain and look at it. You see rollers, those little barrels that ride on the sprocket teeth. When people say a chain is worn, they point at the rollers, at the rust, at the dirt caked on the outside. That's what the spray can is aimed at. That's what your rag wipes. A motorcycle chain does not stretch because the metal gets longer. Steel doesn't stretch like taffy. What actually happens is hidden inside every single link. Each link is built from a pin, and around that pin sits a bushing, and around the bushing sits the roller. When your chain runs, the roller barely moves. The real grinding, the real work, the real wear happens between the pin and the bushing, deep inside, where no spray can ever reaches. Every time a link wraps around the sprocket and straightens back out, that pin rotates a tiny amount inside that bushing. On a 520 chain, there are over 100 of these joints, and each one flexes thousands of times a mile, metal on metal, under load, thousands upon thousands of times. That's where the material wears away. And as each joint loses a few thousandths of an inch, all those tiny gaps add up along the length of the chain. That's what the world calls stretch. It isn't stretch at all. It's 100 little joints wearing loose from the inside out. Here's the number the old man made me measure with my own calipers. A standard motorcycle chain has a pitch of 5/8 of an inch. That's the distance from one pin to the next. When the accumulated wear makes 20 of those links measure more than about 1.5% longer than new, the chain is done. On most bikes, that's when a stretch of chain that should measure 12.5 inches has grown past 12 3/4. 3/16 of an inch of total wear across the whole run, and the whole thing gets thrown out. Think about that. 3/16 of an inch. That's the difference between a good chain and scrap. And that wear is happening in a place your maintenance never reaches, because you were taught to lubricate the one part that barely matters. The old man had me clean a chain until the rollers gleamed. Then he took a link and pried it open on the bench so I could see inside. The outside was spotless. Inside, where the pin met the bushing, it was dry, scored, and rust brown. He said, "You polished the shoes and left the man barefoot." That's the whole game right there. But once I understood where the wear lived, a much uglier question came up. Why is every chain and every product built to ignore the exact spot that kills it? Because somebody makes money on you not knowing. Walk into any parts store and look at the wall of chain lube. Sticky sprays, wax sprays, white lithium, foaming this, ceramic that. Every one of them is designed to cling to the outside of the chain, to the rollers and the side plates, the parts you can see. They cling there because clinging looks good to you. You spray it, it goes on wet, it stays shiny, you feel like you did the job. And almost none of it gets to the pin and bushing where the wear actually happens. Now here's where it turns. On most modern chains it physically cannot get in there, and that's not an accident. Since the early 1970s, quality motorcycle chains have been sealed. A Japanese company, Dido, the DID you've seen stamped on chains, brought the sealed O-ring motorcycle chain to the market around 1971. Tsubaki, another Japanese maker, pushed it further with the X-ring. These little rubber rings sit between the side plates and trap factory grease around the pin and bushing forever. That's genuinely brilliant engineering. The grease that matters is sealed inside at the factory, so follow the logic. If the important grease is sealed inside from day one, then every can of spray lube you've ever bought was only ever protecting the outside rollers and stopping surface rust. The expensive part, the part that determines whether your chain lives or dies, was never something a spray could touch. You've been sold a shelf full of cans to do a job that was already done, or a job that can't be done that way at all. I'm not saying the chain makers are the villains. The sealed chain is a gift. The villain is the whole ritual built around it, the idea that chains are consumables, that you should expect to buy a fresh chain and sprocket set every 15 or 20,000 miles, that spending $60 a year on cans is just the cost of riding. I bought 2 chains in 3 years. At a couple $100 a set installed, plus the cans, I was feeding this thing hundreds of dollars for the privilege of doing the maintenance wrong. The old man never bought a chain in the years I knew him, not one. And the first real thing he taught me wasn't a lube at all. It was how to stop killing chains with the way I set them up in the first place, because half the chains that die never wore out. They were strangled. Here's the mini lesson that saved me the most money before I ever learned the finale. Chain slack. Every rider thinks a tight chain is a good chain. It feels right. It looks tight and racy. No sloppy sag. And a tight chain is the single fastest way to destroy everything. The chain, the sprockets, and your output bearing all at once. Your swing arm pivots. Your rear axle swings up and down over bumps. There's exactly one point in that arc where the distance between the 2 sprockets is at its longest, and it usually isn't when the bike is sitting still. If you set your chain tight while it's on the stand, then hit a bump where that distance grows, the chain has nowhere to go. It yanks hard on the sprockets and pulls sideways on the countershaft, bearing behind the front sprocket. That's a bearing that costs a fortune to replace and lives deep in your engine case. The old man showed me with a ruler and his thumb. Most bikes want somewhere between 1 and 1¼ inches of up and down free play in the middle of the lower run, measured with the bike on its wheels and, ideally, with your weight on it. He'd push the chain up with 2 fingers, let it drop, and read the travel like a doctor reading a pulse. Too tight, he'd loosen the axle and back the adjusters off a hair. He said a chain needs room to breathe, the same way a rope needs a little belly to carry a load without snapping. And there's a second killer hiding right next to that one: alignment. If your rear wheel is even slightly cocked to one side, the chain runs at an angle across the sprockets, and now every link is grinding sideways as it engages. That's why you see chains that wear a bright, shiny edge on one side of the rollers. The marks stamped on your swing arm adjusters are a rough guide, and the old man didn't trust them. He'd run a straight length of string from the rear sprocket forward along the chain run and sight down it with one eye like a marksman, adjusting until the string kissed the sprocket teeth dead even on both sides. Free. Takes 10 minutes, and it's had just double the life of everything back there. So already, before any secret, you've got 2 upgrades. Give the chain room to breathe. Get the wheel dead straight. Do just those two things and you'll outlast every rider who cranks his chain drum tight and wonders why he's back at the counter every season. But breathing and alignment only slow the wear. They don't feed the joint. And the joint is still starving. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now because I thought it too. You're thinking, sure, this is fine if you've got some fancy sealed X-ring chain, but mine's an old plain chain on an old bike, or it's already rusty and stiff, so none of this applies to me. I want to talk straight to you for a minute. Because this next part was actually built for the worn-out chain, not the new one. The plainer and older your chain, the more dramatically this works. A basic non-sealed chain, the kind on a lot of small bikes, dirt bikes, older machines, pit bikes, and quads, has no rubber rings blocking the way in. That means the inside of every joint is wide open, and you can actually get fresh lubricant all the way into the pin and bushing where it counts. The sealed chain traps grease in. The plain chain lets you put grease in whenever you want, and almost nobody does it the right way. So almost every plain chain dies of thirst. And that is exactly the wrong place to be looking. But before I show you the right one, I want to mention something. If this way of thinking, going deeper, finding the real cause, fixing things from the inside out resonates with you, this is exactly the philosophy behind my books Tool Mind, Steel Instinct, and Tool Master. They're written for the kind of person who wants to understand machines at a level most people never reach, the kind of person who'd rather spend an evening at the bench than hand money to a parts counter. You'll find them linked in the description below, and I think you'll feel like they were written directly for you. Now, back to what the old man showed me, because once you see where the wear actually lives, everything changes. And if your chain is already stiff, already rusty, already has a couple of tight kinked links that don't want to flex, don't throw it out yet. A stiff link is almost never a bent link. It's a dry, rust-bound joint, and in most cases you can bring it back to life with nothing but heat, cleaning, and the right lubricant driven inside. I've revived chains that felt like they belonged in the bin. The old man handed me one so rusty it rattled like a bag of bolts, and told me to bring it back. 2 evenings later it flexed like new, and I finally believed him. Here's how you clean it, and this matters, because if you trap grit inside the joint, you're grinding it to death with your own good intentions. Take the chain off if you can, or work it on the bike if you can't. Get yourself some kerosene or plain paraffin, the cheap stuff, not a harsh solvent that attacks rubber if you do have O-rings. Never use a wire wheel or an angle grinder near a chain, and never use gasoline in a closed space. Soak the chain, then work each link back and forth with your fingers, flexing it side to side and up and down so the kerosene carries the old grit out of the joints. A soft brush, an old toothbrush, gets the rollers. You'll see brown sludge come weeping out of the gaps. That's the enemy leaving. Keep going until it runs clean, then hang it up and let every drop of solvent drain and dry, because any solvent left inside will thin out what you put in next. Now the chain is clean, it's aligned, it's got room to breathe, and it's bone dry inside, which is the most vulnerable it will ever be. This is the exact moment the old man had been building me toward for a year. This is where you stop maintaining a chain like everyone else and start doing what the racers and the old masters did. This is the finale, and it costs almost nothing. You're going to lubricate your chain from the inside out, by heat, in a bath, the way it was done before the spray can was ever invented. Here's the principle, and it's beautiful, because it uses physics you already trust. When you gently heat a metal chain, the metal expands, and the tiny gaps in every joint open up a fraction. When you lower that warm chain into melted lubricant, the lubricant is thin and runny from the heat, thin enough to creep into those open joints. Then, as the whole thing cools, the metal contracts and the gaps close down, pulling the lubricant deep inside and locking it around the pin and bushing. and the lubricant itself goes solid as it cools, so it doesn't fling off or drip out. You haven't coated the chain. You've filled it. You've put grease exactly where the wear lives, the one place a spray can never reach. This is not something I made up. This is documented, old, proven workshop practice. Before aerosol lube existed, riders bought blocks of graphited chain grease with names like Linkleaf and Chainlife, going all the way back to the early motoring days near the turn of the last century and right through the 1920s and 30s. You melted the block in an old pot, dropped your clean chain in, let it simmer until the bubbling stopped, and fished it out. That bubbling matters. I'll come back to it. Racers did this religiously because a chain that let go at speed could kill you, and they knew a boiled-in chain outlasted and outheld anything you could brush on. When the spray can arrived, it won on convenience, not on performance. The old knowledge didn't get better, it just got quieter. So here's how you do it on your bench this weekend, and I want you to be careful, because we're melting stuff over heat. Do this outside or in a well-ventilated space, never over an open flame you can't control, and keep a lid nearby. If you have a plain, non-sealed chain, you've got two good choices for the bath. The traditional one is a proper chain grease block or bar, melted slow in an old saucepan you never plan to cook with again. The simpler modern one is plain paraffin wax, the kind used for candles and canning, sometimes with a spoonful of grease or gear oil stirred in so it stays slightly flexible when it sets. Melt it low and gentle. You are not trying to boil it, you're trying to get it thin and hot, somewhere warm enough to flow like water but nowhere near smoking. Lower your clean, dry chain in, and now watch. For the first minute or two you'll see little bubbles rising off the chain. That is the air trapped inside the joints being pushed out as the hot lubricant creeps in to take its place. That bubbling is the whole point. When the bubbles slow and stop, the joints are full. The old-timers said, "Wait till she stops breathing." That's it. That's the moment the inside of your chain is finally, completely fed. Lift it out with a hook or a bent coat hanger, let the excess drip back into the pot, and hang it up to cool. As it cools, the wax sets, the joints tighten, and the lubricant is trapped inside. Wipe the outside so the rollers aren't gummy, and you're done. You've just put lubrication into the heart of the chain that no rider spraying a can in a parking lot will ever match. And a stiff, rusty chain that you thought was scrap will very often come out of that pot flexing smooth and free because the heat and the fresh lubricant broke the rust bond inside every joint. Now the honest part, because I promised you straight talk. If your chain is a modern sealed O-ring or X-ring chain, you do not boil it. High heat can cook those little rubber rings and ruin the seals, and then you've wrecked a good chain. But the same principle still helps you, gently. You warm that chain only slightly, no more than pleasantly warm to the hand, using the heat from a bit of sun or your own hands, and you work a warmed, thin gear oil or a proper O-ring safe chain oil into the rollers and the edges of the rings so it seeps to the roller and side plate faces. On a sealed chain, the pin and bushing are already greased for life from the factory, remember, so your job is only to protect the rollers and stop the rings from drying and cracking. The immersion trick is for the plain chains, and there are far more plain chains out there than people admit, on every dirt bike, pit bike, quad, small commuter, and vintage machine in the world. Do you see what just happened? The sealed chain does the boiling once, at the factory, and traps it in. The old immersion method does the same job on your bench, for pennies, whenever you like. On a chain the parts counter already told you to throw away. Same physics. One of them they charge you for and call technology, the other one they let you forget. I ran this on my own chain and started keeping track, because I didn't believe it either. I measured my 20-link stretch with a caliper every few thousand miles the way the old man taught me. A chain I'd normally have replaced twice over is still sitting well under that 1.5% wear limit after all these years because the joints never went dry and never went gritty. That's the whole secret to going chainless. Not removing the chain. Removing yourself from the cycle of buying them. One chain, cleaned and heat-fed on a schedule, cared for from the inside, can outlive 3 or 4 chains ridden the ordinary way. And it stacks with everything before it. Alignment so the links don't grind sideways. Slack so the chain can breathe and doesn't hammer your countershaft bearing. Cleaning so no grit ever gets driven into the joint. And then the heat bath. So the one place that actually wears is the one place that's always full of lubricant. That's the entire system the old man carried in his hands and never wrote down. 4 things, none of them expensive, and together they end the chain replacement cycle for good. Let me leave you with the picture that finally made it land for me. He held up that first chain, the clean one with the dry heart, and then he held up one he'd boiled, and he flexed them both. The clean one moved in little notchy jerks. The boiled one poured off his fingers like a living thing, link after link falling smooth and silent. Same chain, same age. One was starving, one was fed. He said, "A chain is not a part you buy. It is an animal you keep. Feed it from the inside and it will carry you for years." So that's what I want you to walk away with. Not a product. A pot, a block of wax or grease, a length of string, and a caliper. And the quiet confidence that the wall of cans at the parts store has nothing you actually need. You are not a customer of your own machine anymore. You're the one who understands it better than the guy who sold it to you. That's really who this is for, isn't it? You're the kind of person who would rather know why a thing works than be told to just buy a new one. You'd rather spend an evening at the bench, hands black, learning something that lasts, than hand over $300 to fix a problem you could have prevented for the price of a candle. That's not being cheap, that's being free. So tell me one thing down in the comments, because I read them. When you pull your chain and measure that 20-link stretch with a caliper, what number do you get, and how many miles are on it? I want to see who's been quietly murdering good chains and who's been getting lucky. Drop the measurement, drop the bike, and tell me where you're riding from while you're at it. And if you're the sort who's done being sold junk, who wants to take the tools you already own and make them outlast the people who built them, stay with me here. Next, I'm taking an ordinary angle grinder, the one rattling in everyone's garage, and showing you the single bearing trick a Japanese shop uses to make it cut like a machine 3 times its price. The chain was just the beginning. The whole garage is full of things they told you to replace that you were always meant to keep. Now, this video showed you why your chain wears out. But the full chainless method, link by link, waits for you inside the Workshop Guild. In there you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. And you won't be alone, thousands of tinkerers just like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime.